mountains, there are places people avoid, valleys where the cold never quite leaves, where hikers turn back without knowing why, where something in the air whispers, "Turn around, go home. This place is not for you." The locals have a name for one such valley near Bergen, Norway. They call it Isdalen, Death Valley, a place where troubled souls have gone for centuries, climbing into the rocks and never coming back. Imagine a cold November morning in western Norway. Rain has been falling for days, turning hiking trails to mud, filling mountain streams until they rush white over ancient rocks. The sky hangs low and grey over Bergen, Norway's second largest city, where colourful wooden houses climb steep hillsides and fog drifts through narrow medieval streets. Just outside the city limits, the landscape turns wild. 7 mountains surround Bergen like the walls of a fortress, their peaks disappearing into clouds. And between those mountains lie valleys, remote, treacherous places where few people venture, especially as winter approaches. One of these valleys has a name that makes locals uneasy: Isdalen, the Ice Valley. Some call it by another name, Isdalen, Death Valley. It earned this reputation centuries ago when troubled souls would climb into its rocky embrace and never return. More recently, in the 1960s, hikers had fallen to their deaths on its steep, slippery terrain. It's the kind of place you tell children to avoid, the kind of place where the forest feels too quiet and the rocks seem to watch you pass. On the morning of November 29, 1970, a father and his 2 young daughters, ages 10 and 12, decided to take a Sunday hike in the foothills of Ulriken, the highest of Bergen's 7 mountains. The trail would take them near Isdalen, but they weren't planning to venture deep into the valley itself, just a pleasant walk to get some fresh air, despite the cold and damp. They had no idea they were about to make a discovery that would haunt Norway for more than half a century. As they climbed higher, one of the daughters noticed something strange, a smell. Not the clean scent of rain and pine, but something acrid, chemical, burning. She followed the odor off the main path, picking her way between boulders and through undergrowth. Her father called after her to be careful, to stay where he could see her. And then she screamed. Wedged between 2 large rocks, lying in a small clearing among the scree, was a body. A woman, lying on her back with her arms raised, fists clenched near her chest in what's called a pugilistic or boxer's stance, a position bodies assume when exposed to intense heat. The front of her body was burned beyond recognition. Her face was gone, charred black. Her clothing had melted into her skin, but strangely, eerily, the back of her body appeared untouched by fire. Around the corpse, arranged in what investigators would later describe as an almost ceremonial pattern, lay scattered belongings, jewelry, but not worn, placed beside her. A watch stopped at a specific time, an umbrella broken, plastic bottles with their labels carefully scraped off, rubber boots, pieces of clothing, an empty liqueur bottle. Everything deliberately stripped of identifying marks. everything positioned as if part of some ritual. The father grabbed his daughters and hurried them away from the scene, back down the mountain, through the rain, the 2-hour walk back to Bergen, passing in shocked silence. At the police station, he made his report. Officers listened with growing concern. A body burned in Isdalen. They organized a search party immediately. What they found would launch one of the most baffling investigations in Norwegian history, a case that would involve multiple countries, intelligence agencies, fake passports, coded messages, and a woman who had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure no one would ever know her name. To this day, 55 years later, no one does. This is the story of the Isdal woman, the mystery that refuses to be solved, the spy who came in from the cold and died in the ice. Prologue. Bergen, Norway, 1970. The city. Bergen in 1970 was a city caught between worlds, ancient and modern, provincial and cosmopolitan, peaceful and dangerous. Founded in 1070, Bergen had been Norway's capital during the Middle Ages, a center of Hanseatic trade, a city of merchants and sailors and fish. By 1970, it was Norway's second largest city with about 115,000 residents, but it retained a small town feeling. Neighbors knew each other. Crime was rare. People left their doors unlocked. The city sits on Norway's western coast, sheltered by mountains and islands, surrounded by fjords that cut deep into the landscape like fingers of dark water. It rains constantly. Bergen is one of the wettest cities in Europe, with rain falling an average of 235 days per year. Locals joke that you don't need a weather forecast in Bergen. It's always raining, or about to rain, or just finished raining. But the rain gives the city its character, the way it makes the wooden houses shine, the way mist clings to the hillsides, the way everything feels damp and close and slightly melancholy. In 1970, Norway was prosperous and peaceful. The country had stayed neutral during most of the 20th century's conflicts, though it had been occupied by Nazi Germany during World War II, an experience that left deep scars. By 1970, those scars were healing. Norway was part of NATO, aligned with the West, wealthy from shipping and fishing, and the beginning of North Sea oil development. It was a safe place, a boring place, some might say, but Bergen had secrets. In 1970, the Cold War was at its height. The world was divided between East and West, capitalism and communism, NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Spies moved through Europe like shadows, gathering intelligence, recruiting assets, conducting operations that would never appear in newspapers. Norway, despite its peaceful reputation, played a crucial role in this secret war. Its long border with the Soviet Union in the far north made it a frontier of the Cold War. Its North Atlantic coastline was strategically vital for NATO naval operations, and its military installations, radar stations, naval bases, weapons testing facilities were of intense interest to Soviet intelligence. Bergen itself was home to several sensitive military sites. just south of the city in Stavanger, Norway was testing a new anti-ship missile called the Penguin, a weapon that could threaten Soviet naval vessels. The tests were classified. The schedules were secret. Foreign intelligence services would have paid dearly for information about them. Into this landscape of secrets and rain and mountains, a woman arrived in the spring of 1970. She came quietly, checking into hotels under false names, traveling between cities, watching and waiting and taking notes in a code no one could read. And in November, as the first snows began to fall on the mountains, she died in the most mysterious circumstances imaginable. Part 1. The Discovery. November 29th, 1970, Isdalen Valley. When Bergen police arrived at the scene in Isdalen that Sunday afternoon, they knew immediately this was no ordinary death. Among the first responders was police lawyer Carl Halvor Aas. Decades later, in 2016, he would still remember that climb up the muddy trail, the difficulty of the terrain, the way the smell hit them before they saw the body. The first thing we notice is the stench, Aas recalled. I remember we were walking and sometimes climbing up the scree slope. As we hurry along, I'm wondering where we're heading because it all seems so steep and impassable. This is no hiking trail, that's for sure. The location itself was significant. This wasn't a place you stumbled upon by accident. It was remote, difficult to reach, far from any established path. Someone would have had to deliberately climb here, picking their way through rocks and undergrowth, knowing exactly where they were going. Or someone would have had to carry a body here. When the officers reached the site, they spread out, carefully documenting everything before touching anything. This was clearly a death investigation, possibly a crime scene. Every detail mattered. The woman lay on her back in a small depression between large boulders, her head pointing slightly downhill. She was positioned in what forensic experts call the pugilistic attitude. Arms raised, fists clenched, legs slightly bent. This posture is characteristic of bodies exposed to intense heat. As muscles contract from burning, the body naturally assumes a boxer-like stance. The front of her body was severely burned. Her face was unrecognizable, charred black. The front of her clothing had melted into her flesh. Her hair, where it remained, was singed short. But, and this was the first major oddity, the back of her body appeared almost untouched by fire. Her back, shoulders, and the back of her head showed minimal damage. It was as if the fire had only burned from one direction, from the front, consuming the woman face first. Some officers theorized she might have accidentally caught fire and thrown herself backward, which would explain why only the front was burned. But there was no evidence of a campfire nearby, no charred wood, no fire pit, just burned body, burned belongings, and the faint chemical smell of accelerant in the air. The woman appeared to be between 25 and 40 years old. It was difficult to determine precisely given the condition of the remains. She was approximately 5 feet 4 inches tall, 163 centimeters, with a slim build. Her long, dark brown hair, where unburned, was thick and well maintained. She had been wearing what appeared to be relatively nice clothing before the fire destroyed it. The remains of what might have been a dress or skirt, stockings, the rubber boots found nearby. But here was the strange part. She wasn't wearing any jewelry. No rings on her fingers, no necklace, no earrings. And yet, scattered around the body, arranged in what investigators would later describe as an oddly deliberate pattern, were personal items. A watch, not on her wrist, but placed near the body. A ring, not on her finger, but lying on a rock. Earrings, removed and set aside. A broken umbrella. 2 plastic water bottles. An empty bottle of St. Halvard liqueur, a Norwegian brand. A plastic passport holder, melted, empty. Rubber boots. A woolen sweater. A scarf. Remnants of nylon stockings. A purse. A matchbox. 12 pink sleeping pills scattered near the body. Forensic investigator Tormod Bones, who examined the scene, noted the placement and location of the objects surrounding the body was strange. It looked like there had been some kind of ceremony. The jewelry hadn't been stolen. It was right there, carefully removed and placed nearby, as if the woman had taken it off herself before. Before what? Before setting herself on fire? Before someone else set her on fire? And then there were the labels. Every single item, the clothing, the bottles, the personal effects, had been meticulously stripped of identifying marks. Manufacturing labels cut from clothing, paper labels scraped off plastic bottles, brand names removed from the umbrella handle. Even the sleeping pill bottle was gone. Only the pills remained. Someone had gone to enormous effort to ensure this woman could not be identified. As rain began to fall again and darkness approached, the officers carefully photographed the scene and prepared to transport the body to Gaudes Institute in Bergen for autopsy. But already questions were multiplying. Who was this woman? How did she get to this remote location? Did she come here voluntarily, or was she brought here? Was this suicide, accident, or murder? Why was only the front of her body burned? Why were her belongings arranged so carefully around her? And most puzzling of all, why had someone, perhaps the woman herself, taken such extraordinary measures to remove every trace of her identity? The father and his daughters who discovered the body were interviewed carefully. They hadn't seen anyone else in the area. They hadn't heard anything unusual. They'd simply been hiking and stumbled upon the scene. A search of the surrounding area turned up nothing additional. No camping equipment, no vehicle, no evidence of how the woman had arrived at this spot. It was as if she had simply materialized in the ice valley, burned to death, and left behind only questions. The case was assigned number 134/70th in Bergen police records. What no one realized yet was that this case would still be unsolved 55 years later, and that the mystery would only deepen with every new discovery. Part 2. The Autopsy. December 1st, 1970, Gaudes Institute, Bergen. The autopsy of the Isdal woman was conducted by forensic pathologist Torstein K. Haugen at the Gaudes Institute, Bergen's primary medical facility. The examination would take several days and require input from multiple specialists. What they discovered would be both revealing and deeply disturbing. With the body laid out under clinical lighting, pathologists could make more detailed observations. The woman was approximately 163 centimeters tall, 5'4". Based on bone development and other physical markers, she appeared to be between 30 and 40 years old, possibly closer to 40. She was in generally good health at the time of death. No signs of chronic illness, no evidence of drug abuse, no indication she'd ever been pregnant or given birth. Her teeth were particularly notable. She had 14 fillings and several gold crowns, expensive, high-quality dental work. The type and style of the crowns were unusual for Norway, but common in certain parts of Europe, possibly Eastern Europe or South America. The gold work suggested someone who either had money or had lived in a place where gold dental work was standard. Pathologists carefully removed the woman's jaw and teeth for preservation. They knew these unique dental characteristics might be crucial for eventual identification. The toxicology analysis revealed the woman had consumed a massive quantity of sleeping pills. Between 50 and 70 tablets of phenymal brand phenobarbital, a powerful barbiturate sedative. The pills were pink, a variety sold in England but not in Norway. Norwegian phenymal pills were white. This suggested the woman had obtained the pills outside Norway, possibly during international travel. The blood concentration of phenobarbital was 4.5 milligrams per 100 milliliters, enough to cause severe drowsiness and incapacitation, but not immediately lethal. According to the autopsy report, this concentration was roughly half what would be required to cause unconsciousness. The woman would have been heavily sedated, stumbling, confused, but still technically alive and breathing. Analysis of her stomach contents revealed that many of the pills had not yet fully dissolved or been absorbed into her bloodstream, suggesting they'd been consumed shortly before death, perhaps within an hour or two. The presence of soot particles in her respiratory tract proved definitively that she had been alive and breathing during the fire. She had inhaled smoke. Her lungs contained carbon monoxide at levels sufficient to cause death through asphyxiation. The official cause of death, a combination of phenobarbital poisoning and carbon monoxide poisoning from the fire. But this raised immediate questions. If she was so heavily sedated she could barely function, how did she get to the remote location in Isdalen? How did she arrange her belongings so carefully? How did she start the fire? On the right side of the woman's neck, pathologists found a significant hematoma, a bruise consistent with blunt force trauma. It could have resulted from a fall, a blow, or possibly strangulation. The bruise didn't appear to be the cause of death, but its presence suggested the woman had suffered some kind of physical trauma shortly before or during her death. Had she fallen while climbing to the site, disoriented from the sleeping pills? Or had someone struck her? Traces of petrol, gasoline, were found on the woman's clothing and skin. The fire that consumed her had been accelerated with fuel. This wasn't an accidental campfire that spread out of control. Someone had deliberately doused her body, or she had doused herself, with flammable liquid and set it alight. The pattern of burning confirmed what observers at the scene had noted. The fire had burned primarily from the front. The woman's back showed minimal damage. This suggested she had been lying on her back when the fire started, protecting her back from the flames. Despite the burning, the woman's fingerprints on some fingers remained intact enough to be recorded. Police carefully documented them and sent them to Interpol, the International Criminal Police Organization, for comparison against databases in multiple countries. They would find no matches. Whoever this woman was, she had no criminal record, no registered fingerprints anywhere in the world. In addition to the sleeping pills, the woman's stomach contained partially digested food, sausage, and what appeared to be porridge or gruel. This suggested she'd eaten a meal several hours before death, possibly at a hotel or restaurant. The presence of undigested food and partially dissolved pills helped pathologists estimate the timeline. The woman had likely consumed the pills within an hour or two of arriving at Isdalen, possibly even after getting there. She might have eaten her last meal 4-6 hours before death. On December 1st, 1970, the official autopsy report was completed. The ruling: probable suicide by combined drug overdose and self-immolation. The reasoning: the woman had consumed a massive quantity of sleeping pills, traveled to a remote location, arranged her belongings around herself, removed her jewelry, and set herself on fire. It was an unusual method of suicide, certainly, and there were troubling inconsistencies, but absent clear evidence of another person's involvement, suicide seemed most likely. The case could be closed. The woman would be buried as an unidentified person. Life would move on. Except, some of the investigators weren't satisfied. The scenario didn't quite make sense. A woman so drugged she could barely stand, somehow making her way to one of the most inaccessible spots near Bergen, carefully arranging items around herself while heavily sedated, setting herself on fire without leaving any accelerant container at the scene. And then there was the biggest question of all: who was she? A woman doesn't simply appear out of nowhere, die mysteriously, and leave behind no trace of her identity, not unless she's deliberately trying to disappear, or unless someone else is trying to make her disappear. Part 3: The Suitcases. December 2nd, 1970, Bergen railway station. 3 days after the body was discovered, Bergen police received a call from the left luggage office at Bergen railway station. 2 unclaimed suitcases had been sitting in storage for over a week. Given the unidentified body that had been found, might they be relevant? Investigators hurried to the station. When they opened the suitcases, they realized the case had just become exponentially more complex. Inside the 2 bags, carefully packed, were clothing, multiple outfits in different styles, a variety of shoes, scarves and accessories, all clothing labels meticulously removed, wigs, several wigs in different colors and styles, one dark brown, one lighter brown, possibly others, disguised materials, a pair of non-prescription glasses, just frames with plain glass, makeup and cosmetics, brand labels removed, a comb and hairbrush, medications, a tube of prescription eczema cream with the label torn off, patient name scratched away, more pink Phenomol sleeping pills, money, 135 Norwegian kroner, about $20 USD, German Deutschmarks, Belgian francs, Swiss francs, 5.50 francs, British pounds, coins from multiple countries, maps and documentation, train and bus timetables, maps of Norwegian cities, hotel receipts, a notepad with mysterious coded writing, miscellaneous, sunglasses, a sewing kit from Hotel Regina in Geneva, Switzerland, a plastic shopping bag from Oscar Rortvedt's footwear store in Stavanger, Norway, 130 miles from Bergen. Various personal items, all stripped of identifying information, and one crucial piece of evidence. On the lens of the non-prescription glasses, forensic technicians found a partial fingerprint. When compared to the fingerprints taken from the body, it was a match. These suitcases belonged to the Isdal woman. The most intriguing item was the notepad. It contained what appeared to be a simple code, combinations of letters and numbers that made no immediate sense. N9, N18S, J22P, J3 inches, O28P, O29P. Cryptographers were brought in. At first the code seemed impenetrable, but as investigators cross-referenced the entries with other evidence, a pattern began to emerge. The letters might represent places. N could be a Norwegian city, P might be Paris, S could be Stavanger. The numbers appeared to be dates. If so, the notepad wasn't a spy's encrypted messages, it was a travel log, a record of where the woman had been and when. N9N18S would translate to traveled from one Norwegian city to another between the 9th and 18th, then to Stavanger. But this raised new questions. Why write it in code at all? Why not just keep a normal date book? Unless she needed to hide her movements from someone who might search her belongings. Unless the dates and locations themselves were sensitive information. The plastic bag from Oscar Rortvedt's footwear store gave investigators their first solid lead. They traveled to Stavanger, about 3 hours south of Bergen, and interviewed the store's owner and his son, Rolf Rortvedt. Rolf remembered the woman immediately. She came in about 3 weeks ago, he told police. She wanted to buy boots, blue rubber boots with a chunky heel. We called them celebrity boots. He described her as well-dressed, attractive, with dark brown hair and a calm demeanor. She spoke with an accent, not Norwegian, possibly German or French. Her Norwegian was limited, but she spoke fluent German. And there was one odd detail Rolf remembered vividly. Though it seemed insignificant at the time, she smelled strongly of garlic, not unpleasant, just noticeable, as if she'd eaten a meal heavily seasoned with garlic shortly before coming to the store. The boots Rolf described matched exactly the boots found at the death scene in Isdalen. Using this connection, police checked hotels in Stavanger. Had anyone matching this description stayed there recently? Yes. At the Hotel Svithen, staff remembered her clearly. She'd checked in under the name Fenella Lorch from Belgium. Belgium. But there was something strange about her stay. She'd arrived, checked into one room, then immediately requested to change rooms. Then she'd changed rooms again, 3 different rooms in a single night. Hotel staff remembered this because it was unusual, even a bit annoying. What was wrong with the rooms? She never explained. She just wanted to move. The hotel registration form for Fenella Lorch was retrieved. In 1970, Norwegian law required all hotels to collect information from guests and forward it to police, a holdover from World War II occupation procedures that had never been fully discontinued. The form showed name Fenella Lorch, nationality Belgian, address Brussels, street name provided, occupation traveling saleswoman and antique dealer, date of stay early November 1970. The handwriting on the form was neat, continental-style penmanship, written in German. Investigators sent inquiries to Belgium. Was there a Fenella Lorch registered at the Brussels address provided? The answer came back, no. The street name was real, but the specific address didn't exist, and no one named Fenella Lorch was registered in Belgian records. The name was fake, but why would a woman using a fake identity stay at a hotel where she knew her information would be recorded and sent to police? Unless she didn't expect to be caught. Unless she planned to disappear before anyone looked too closely at the paperwork. Or unless she wanted police to find certain information while hiding other details. Using the handwriting on the Fenella Lorch hotel form as a reference, investigators began checking other hotels throughout Norway. The sketch of the Isdal woman, reconstructed based on the parts of her that weren't burned and descriptions from witnesses, was circulated to every hotel in Norway. More matches came flooding in. The woman had stayed at multiple hotels across Norway over the past several months, but she'd never used the same name twice. At various hotels she'd checked in as Fenella Lorch, Stavanger, Genevieve Lancia, another location, Claudia Tielt, yet another, Claudia Nielsen, similar to above, perhaps an alternate spelling, Alexia Zana Merches, more elaborate, Vera Jarl, simpler, Elizabeth Lienhauer, later identified at additional hotels, at least 8 different identities, possibly more. Handwriting analysis confirmed all the hotel registration forms had been completed by the same person. The Isdal woman had been traveling through Norway for months, systematically checking into hotels under false names. Some patterns emerged. She always claimed to be Belgian. She wrote forms in German or French, never Norwegian or English. She frequently changed rooms after checking in. She paid in cash. She often requested rooms with specific characteristics, corner rooms, rooms with certain views. Staff described her as well-dressed, quiet, elegant but somewhat nervous. One waitress, Alfhild Ragnes, remembered serving her at a hotel restaurant. My first impression of her was one of elegance and self-assuredness, she told investigators. In fact, I remember her winking at me. From my perspective, it felt as though she thought I had been staring a bit too much at her. Another hotel employee recalled surprising the woman in her room with a man. They were sitting together but not speaking, which seemed odd. When asked, the woman curtly dismissed the staff member. By cross-referencing the coded notepad with hotel records and handwriting analysis, investigators pieced together the woman's movements through Norway, spring 1970. She had arrived in Norway in March or April and spent several weeks traveling between cities, Oslo, Trondheim, Bergen, Stavanger. Then she left Norway, October-November 1970. She returned to Norway at the end of October. This time, her travels were more intensive. Late October, Paris, France. Stayed at 2 hotels as Vera Schlosseneck. November 9th, 18. Norwegian cities, multiple locations. November 18th, 20. Stavanger as Fenella Lorch. November 20th, 23. Bergen, checked into Hotel Horrifying. November 23rd, checked out of Hotel Horrifying. November 29th, found dead in Isdalen. The pattern suggested purposeful movement. She wasn't a tourist randomly seeing sights. She was traveling with specific destinations in mind, staying in each place for defined periods, then moving on. It looked like surveillance, or intelligence gathering, or meetings with contacts. It looked to the experienced investigators examining the evidence like the travel pattern of a spy. Part 4. The Spy Theory. December 1970. Multiple investigations. As Bergen police pieced together the Isdal woman's movements, other agencies were taking notice. This was 1970, the Cold War. A woman with multiple false passports, coded travel logs, and disguised materials traveling through Norway and dying under mysterious circumstances. It wasn't just a local police matter anymore. On December 21, 1970, Bergen police held a press conference. They announced their official conclusion: probable suicide. But behind the scenes, several investigators privately disagreed, and more significantly, other agencies were conducting their own parallel investigations. Unknown to the Bergen police at the time, the Norwegian intelligence service, Etterretningstjenesten, had opened their own classified investigation into the Isdal woman. A file marked secret and dated December 1970 revealed that Norwegian military intelligence was very interested in this case. Why? Because the Isdal woman's movements through Norway corresponded precisely with sensitive military activities. In 1970, Norway was conducting classified tests of a new anti-ship missile system called the Penguin. The missile was designed to be launched from small patrol boats and was capable of destroying much larger vessels, exactly the kind of weapon that would concern the Soviet Navy, which regularly operated in Norwegian waters. The tests were taking place near Stavanger at military facilities in the region. The schedules were secret. The specifications were classified. Foreign intelligence services, particularly Soviet intelligence, would have been extremely interested in obtaining information about these tests. Norwegian Armed Forces Commander Onarheim noted in a classified report that the Isdal woman's travel patterns matched the timing and locations of the secret Penguin missile trials. When Norwegian Defense Research Establishment personnel were staying at hotels in Stavanger during missile tests, the Isdal woman was also staying at hotels in Stavanger. When tests moved to other locations, her travel pattern shifted accordingly. This couldn't be coincidence. Additionally, one witness came forward, not to Bergen police, but to a security officer at Ulsnes Naval Base in Stavanger. A local fisherman reported that he'd seen a woman matching the Isdal woman's description near the naval facility, apparently observing ship movements and taking notes. When he asked what she was doing, she claimed to be a tourist interested in boats. But her presence near a restricted military area was suspicious. The witness reported this to naval security, who documented it but apparently never shared the information with Bergen police investigating the death. Another crucial piece of evidence emerged, though not until years later. In 2005, a Bergen resident came forward with information he'd tried to report in 1970 but had been told to forget about it. The man, who had been 26 years old in 1970, said he'd been hiking on the hillside near Fløyen, one of Bergen's mountains, on November 24, 1970, 5 days before the body was discovered. He saw a woman who matched the Isdal woman's description. She was dressed lightly, city clothes, not hiking gear, which seemed odd for the location and cold weather. She was walking ahead of two men. The men were wearing coats and appeared to be southern, Mediterranean or Middle Eastern in appearance, the witness thought. The woman looked resigned, defeated. She made brief eye contact with the witness and seemed about to say something, but didn't. The men followed behind her, not speaking. The witness remembered this encounter because it seemed so out of place. Why were these people hiking in that area dressed inappropriately with the woman appearing distressed? When the sketch of the Isdal woman was circulated after her death, the witness recognized her immediately. He went to someone he knew in the police and reported the sighting. But he was told to forget about it. The information was never officially recorded. His name was never taken. The two men were never investigated. Why? The witness speculated that police or someone in authority didn't want this information pursued, that perhaps the case involved sensitive matters best left alone. Investigation of the woman's movements revealed she had been traveling internationally in the months before her death. April 1st, 1970. She purchased a train ticket in Stavanger for travel to Basel, Switzerland. The journey would have taken at least 24 hours, partly by rail ferry. Basel is close to the French and German borders, a logical transit point for someone traveling through Europe. The sewing kit from Hotel Regina in Geneva suggested she'd stayed in Switzerland, possibly meeting contacts there. June 22nd, July 3rd, 1970. The coded notepad indicated a stay in Paris, marked as P. This overlapped with late October 1970. She returned to Paris, staying at two hotels under the name Vera Schlosseneck. Investigators checking airline passenger manifests made an interesting discovery. On one of the flights the woman took to Norway, there was an unidentified French national registered. This suggested she might have been traveling on a French passport, though no French passport was ever found. Belgian authorities, contacted by Norwegian police, confirmed that all the Belgian addresses and identities the woman had used were fictitious. She wasn't Belgian, despite consistently claiming that nationality. French authorities confirmed the Paris hotel stays but could provide no information about who Vera Schlosseneck really was. If the Isdal woman was a spy, who was she working for? Soviet Union, the most obvious candidate. Soviet intelligence services were extremely active in Scandinavia during the Cold War, and information about Norwegian military capabilities would be valuable. The woman's travel patterns matched Soviet intelligence operational procedures. Multiple identities, coded notes, careful tradecraft. East Germany, Stasi, also possible. The Stasi worked closely with Soviet intelligence and had networks throughout Western Europe. Israel, Mossad. Some theorists suggested Mossad, which was known to be active in Europe. However, later DNA analysis would make this less likely, as the woman appeared to be of European descent. A third party. Perhaps she was working for a smaller intelligence service or even a private organization, gathering industrial or military intelligence for sale. Or was she running from someone? An alternative theory. Perhaps she wasn't a spy conducting operations, but rather a former intelligence operative trying to disappear. The multiple identities, the constant movement, the disguises, these could be the behaviors of someone fleeing, not someone actively spying. If she defected or betrayed her handlers or simply wanted out of the intelligence world, she might have been running for her life, which would explain why she ended up dead in a remote Norwegian valley. Part 5. The investigation stalls. January-February 1971. Despite the enormous amount of evidence collected and the international cooperation, investigators could not answer the most basic question: who was she? The fingerprints sent to Interpol matched no records. The dental records, while unique, matched no known patient files. The fake identities led nowhere. They were all fabrications, carefully constructed but entirely fictional. The photographs and sketches circulated through European police agencies generated no positive identifications. No family came forward, no friends, no employers. No one anywhere in the world reported a missing woman matching her description and the timeline. It was as if she had never existed. On February 6, 1971, the Isdal woman was buried at Mollendal Cemetery in Bergen. The ceremony was small, attended by a handful of police officials and a priest. No family, no mourners, just strangers burying an unknown woman. But the burial itself became another mystery in a case already filled with them. The woman was placed in a zinc coffin, an unusual choice that effectively sealed the body from the elements and prevented decomposition. Zinc coffins were typically used when bodies needed to be transported long distances or preserved for extended periods. Why use such an expensive, elaborate coffin for an unidentified woman? The gravesite was marked with a simple stone that read, "Identified woman, please accept our deepest sympathy." The date of death was given as November 29, 1970. No name, no birth date, no country of origin. The location of the grave was recorded but not widely publicized. Officials seemed to want the matter quietly concluded. And then something even stranger happened. Someone began visiting the grave. Cemetery workers at Isdal noticed that periodically, several times a year, someone would visit the Isdal woman's grave and leave flowers. Not elaborate arrangements, simple bouquets, sometimes just a single flower. The visits continued for years, decades even, always anonymous, never at regular intervals, just occasional flowers left by someone who knew where she was buried and cared enough to remember her. Cemetery staff tried to observe who was leaving the flowers, but the visitor was clever. The flowers would appear when no one was watching. Early morning, late evening, times when the cemetery was empty. Was it family, a friend, a former colleague, someone who knew her identity but couldn't or wouldn't come forward? Or was it someone making sure she stayed dead and buried, marking her grave to ensure the right person remained in the ground? The mystery visitor continued leaving flowers well into the 2000s until they eventually stopped. Perhaps the person died, perhaps they finally moved on, or perhaps they decided it was no longer necessary. To this day, no one knows who they were. In February 1971, Bergen police officially closed the case. Their final report concluded probable suicide by combined drug overdose and self-immolation. Identity unknown. No evidence of foul play. The case was filed away. The evidence was stored. Life moved on. But some investigators never let it go. Tormod Bones, the forensic investigator who'd examined the scene, later said, "I never believed it was suicide. There were too many inconsistencies. The location was too remote, the arrangement of items was too deliberate, and most significantly, how does a woman so heavily drugged she can barely function make her way to one of the most inaccessible places near Bergen?" Retired police lawyer Carl Halvor Ars, speaking in 2016, was even more direct. "We had our suspicions about what happened, but we were told to close the case. There were political considerations, matters that went beyond local police jurisdiction." When pressed about what he meant by political considerations, Ars would only say, "Cold War, intelligence matters, things we couldn't investigate further even if we wanted to." In the decades after 1971, much of the evidence from the Isdal woman case simply vanished. The suitcases with her belongings gone, claimed destroyed in a fire at a police storage facility in 1987. The coded notepad, lost, exact location unknown. Many of the hotel registration forms missing from archives. Photographs of the death scene, some preserved, others disappeared. The original autopsy report, portions missing or redacted. Interview transcripts with witnesses, incomplete or lost entirely. It was as if someone wanted the case to be forgotten, as if the evidence was deliberately being erased. When journalists and researchers began investigating the case in the 2000s, they encountered bureaucratic obstacles at every turn. Files were misplaced, documents were classified, officials claimed records had been destroyed according to standard procedures. But veteran investigators found this suspicious. Cold cases were typically archived, not destroyed. Evidence was preserved, yet the Isdal woman case seemed to have been systematically stripped of documentation. Why? Part 6. The cold case heats up. 2005 to 2016. New interest. For 35 years, the Isdal woman case remained largely forgotten, except by those who'd worked on it. But in the mid-2000s, Norwegian journalists began revisiting old cold cases, and the Isdal woman captured public imagination in a way she never had during the original investigation. The story had everything: mystery, espionage, international intrigue, an unidentified woman, possible murder covered up as suicide, missing evidence, Cold War secrets. In 2016, Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation NRK launched an extensive investigation into the case. They produced a podcast series called Death in Ice Valley that would bring international attention to the Isdal woman for the first time. The journalists, Marit Heigraf and Neil McCarthy, spent months tracking down surviving witnesses, obtaining previously classified documents, and consulting with modern forensic experts. What they discovered reignited the entire investigation. Several witnesses who'd been reluctant to speak in 1970, whether out of fear, uncertainty, or because they'd been told their information wasn't needed, came forward in 2016. The man who'd seen the woman with two men near Fløyen told his story publicly for the first time. Hotel workers who'd served her meals or cleaned her rooms shared details they remembered. She was fastidious about privacy. She always kept the "Do Not Disturb" sign on her door. She rarely engaged in conversation beyond what was necessary. One hotel chambermaid remembered cleaning the woman's room and finding it oddly impersonal. No personal items left out, no photographs, nothing to indicate who the occupant was. It was like a hotel room no one actually lived in, she said. One of the most significant developments came from modern forensic science that hadn't existed in 1970. Professor Leif Jonasson from the University of Bergen proposed using isotope analysis on the Isdal woman's teeth to determine where she'd grown up. Human teeth are like time capsules. As they form during childhood, they absorb trace elements from the water and food in your environment. Different regions have different isotope signatures, measurable ratios of elements like strontium, oxygen, and lead that act as geographical fingerprints. In 2017, Norwegian authorities granted permission to exhume the Isdal woman's body. On October 6, 2016, forensic teams opened the zinc coffin at Morendal Cemetery. Inside, they found the woman's remains remarkably well preserved. The zinc coffin had done its job. Her skeleton was intact, and crucially, her teeth were in excellent condition. Samples were carefully extracted and sent to the Center for Isotope Research at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. The isotope analysis revealed stunning information. The Isdal woman had been born and raised in Nuremberg, Germany, or the border region between Germany and France, specifically an area that included parts of the Rhineland-Palatinate, Baden-Württemberg, or northeastern France near the German border. The water isotope signatures in her teeth matched this specific geographical region. She had spent her early childhood, roughly the first 7-10 years of life, in this area. This was breakthrough information. For the first time, investigators knew approximately where the woman came from. But the isotope analysis also revealed something else. The woman had moved during adolescence. Later forming teeth showed different isotope signatures, suggesting she'd relocated to another part of Europe during her teenage years, possibly to Eastern Europe or Scandinavia. This pattern fit perfectly with Cold War espionage. A German woman, possibly from a family that moved to East Germany or another Eastern Bloc country during the 1940s or 1950s, who might have been recruited by intelligence services and trained as an operative. Along with isotope analysis, forensic teams extracted DNA from the woman's remains. The DNA profile revealed she was of European ancestry, likely Central or Eastern European. Her mitochondrial DNA haplogroup, inherited through the maternal line, was H, common throughout Europe, but particularly prevalent in Germany and surrounding regions. She had no close genetic matches in any genealogical databases. The DNA was entered into international databases in hopes of finding familial matches, distant relatives who might help trace her identity through genetic genealogy, the technique that had recently been used to solve other cold cases like the Golden State Killer. As of 2024, no definitive matches have been found. However, the DNA remains in databases, waiting for the day when a relative submits their own DNA for testing. Using modern forensic art techniques and 3D scanning technology, experts created a new facial reconstruction of the Isdal woman based on her skull structure. The reconstruction showed a woman with delicate features, high cheekbones, a somewhat pointed chin, and a refined appearance. She looked intelligent, purposeful, exactly the kind of face that could blend into European cities without standing out. The new reconstruction was more accurate than the 1970 sketches, which had been hampered by the damage to her face from burning. This detailed reconstruction was circulated internationally through social media, generating millions of views. Thousands of tips poured in from people who thought they recognized her, or knew someone who disappeared around that time, or had family members who'd worked in intelligence services. Each tip was investigated, each led nowhere. It seemed that even with modern science, the Isdal woman was determined to keep her secrets. Part 7. Theories and Suspects. 2017 to 2024, the search continues. As new evidence emerged and public interest grew, various theories about the Isdal woman's identity and the circumstances of her death proliferated. Theory 1. Soviet spy. The most widely accepted theory among intelligence historians is that the Isdal woman was a Soviet intelligence operative, possibly working for the GRU, Soviet Military Intelligence, or KGB. Evidence supporting this. Her travel patterns matched the timing and locations of classified Norwegian military activities. She used sophisticated tradecraft, multiple identities, coded notes, disguises. She appeared to be fluent in German and possibly Russian, Some witnesses thought her accent might have been Eastern European. The isotope evidence suggested possible relocation to Eastern Europe during adolescence, consistent with recruitment by Soviet intelligence. Soviet intelligence was extremely active in Scandinavia and desperate for information about NATO capabilities. The theory suggests she was conducting surveillance on the Penguin missile tests and other Norwegian military activities. Perhaps she was caught by Norwegian counterintelligence, or perhaps she was killed by her own handlers who feared she'd been compromised or was about to defect. The rushed burial in a zinc coffin and the missing evidence could have been the result of political pressure to close the case quickly and avoid an international incident during the Cold War. Theory 2. East German Stasi operative. A variation on the spy theory suggests she worked for East Germany's Stasi intelligence service rather than directly for the Soviets. The Stasi had extensive networks in Western Europe and worked closely with Soviet intelligence. The isotope evidence showing she grew up near the German border fits this theory. She could have been from a family that ended up in East Germany after World War II. The Stasi was known for using female operatives and for maintaining extremely strict operational security. If she was Stasi, her identity might still be in East German intelligence archives, files that remain partially classified even today. Theory 3. Double agent. Some researchers suggest the Isdal woman might have been a double agent, working for one intelligence service while secretly reporting to another. This would explain the extreme measures taken to hide her identity and the possible involvement of multiple intelligence agencies. If she'd been exposed as a double agent, both sides would want her eliminated. The presence of two men walking with her near Floyan 5 days before her death could have been handlers from one side, taking her to be retired permanently. Theory 4. Mossad operative. Early theories suggested she might have been an Israeli Mossad agent. Israel's intelligence service was extremely active in Europe during this period, tracking Nazi war criminals and conducting operations against hostile nations. However, the DNA analysis showing European ancestry and the isotope evidence pointing to Germany make this theory less likely, though not impossible. Mossad employed operatives of various backgrounds. Theory 5. Industrial espionage. Not all espionage is political. Some researchers suggest the Isdal woman might have been conducting industrial espionage, stealing technological or commercial secrets for sale to the highest bidder. Norway in 1970 was developing not just military technology but also advanced shipping and oil drilling technology. These would be valuable to competitors. This theory would explain why she traveled so extensively and why she might not appear in any government intelligence databases. She wasn't working for a government at all, but for a private entity. Theory 6. She was running. An alternative theory suggests the Isdal woman wasn't actively spying when she died. She was running from someone. Perhaps she'd been an intelligence operative who wanted out. Perhaps she'd defected or stolen something or simply knew too much. The multiple identities and constant movement weren't for conducting operations. They were attempts to stay hidden. This theory would explain why she seemed nervous and frightened, according to witnesses, why she changed hotel rooms constantly, why she was dressed inappropriately for hiking. Perhaps she was lured or forced to go to Isdalen. If she was running, whoever was chasing her eventually caught up to her on November 29th, 1970. Theory 7. Suicide. But why? Some still maintain the official 1970 conclusion, suicide. But even suicide theorists acknowledge this wasn't a simple case of depression. The elaborate preparations, the coded notes, the multiple identities, the removal of all identifying marks suggest someone who was planning her death meticulously. Perhaps she was terminally ill and knew she was dying. Perhaps she'd been compromised as an intelligence operative and chose death over capture and interrogation. Perhaps she'd committed acts she couldn't live with and wanted to ensure her family never knew what she'd done. The sleeping pills and fire could have been a way to ensure death while making identification difficult, sparing her family the shame or danger of being associated with whatever she'd been involved in. Part 8. The Genoud Connection. 2023. A stunning discovery. Just when it seemed the case had exhausted all leads, journalist Jan Malum made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the investigation. While researching the hotel registration forms, Malum noticed something odd about one of the names the Isdal woman had used, Alexia Zane-Merches. The name was unusual. The hyphenation, the specific combination of letters, it seemed almost constructed. Malum began researching the name and discovered that Zan was extremely rare. In fact, searching through databases and historical records, he could find only one notable person with a similar name component: François Genoud. Who was François Genoud? François Genoud was a Swiss banker with one of the most sinister reputations in post-war Europe. Born in 1915 in Lausanne, Switzerland, Genoud became a committed Nazi sympathizer in the 1930s. During World War II, he worked with German intelligence and developed close relationships with high-ranking Nazis. After the war, Genoud became the literary executor of the writings of Adolf Hitler, Joseph Goebbels, and Martin Bormann. He controlled the rights to their works and collected royalties from publications worldwide, making substantial money from Nazi propaganda. But Genoud's activities went far beyond literary management. He was a financier who allegedly helped Nazi war criminals escape Europe, funded far-right political movements, and provided financial support to various terrorist organizations. Most significantly for this case, François Genoud was deeply involved in intelligence operations. He had connections to multiple intelligence services and worked as a facilitator for clandestine operations throughout the Cold War. He lived in Switzerland and France. He traveled extensively, and he had connections throughout Europe's intelligence underworld. François Genoud died by assisted suicide in 1996, taking his secrets with him. Malum discovered that Alexia Zane-Merches bore striking similarities to names associated with Genoud's network. The structure of the name, the hyphenation, the use of rare surname components, matched patterns used in Genoud's circles for creating operational aliases. More significantly, records showed that François Genoud was in Geneva in June 1970, exactly when the Isdal woman had stayed at Hotel Regina in Geneva, evidenced by the sewing kit in her suitcase. Could the Isdal woman have met with François Genoud? Was she working for him, or with him, or against him? Genoud's network included intelligence operatives from multiple countries. He facilitated payments, arranged meetings, provided cover for operations. If the Isdal woman was involved in intelligence work, Genoud would have been exactly the kind of facilitator she might have encountered. If the Isdal woman had connections to François Genoud's network, it would explain several mysteries. Why her death might have been covered up. Genoud's operations often involved politically sensitive matters that governments preferred to keep quiet. Why evidence disappeared. Protecting Genoud's network would have been a priority for multiple intelligence services. Why she used such sophisticated tradecraft. Genoud trained or employed professional operatives. Why she traveled between Norway, Switzerland, France, and Germany. These were the key locations in Genoud's network. But it also raised new questions. Was she working for Genoud's network, or was she investigating it? Was she killed by the network, or by someone trying to stop the network? The connection to Genoud opened up an entirely new dimension to the case. One that tied the Isdal woman not just to Cold War espionage, but to the shadowy underworld of post-Nazi networks, terrorist financing, and international intelligence operations. Part 9. The evidence speaks. What we know for certain. Despite all the mysteries, certain facts about the Isdal woman case are indisputable. Identity and origin. She was a woman aged 30, 40 at time of death. She grew up in the Nuremberg, Germany region or German-French border area. She moved to another location during adolescence. She was of Central Eastern European ancestry. She had expensive dental work suggesting access to money. She spoke fluent German and possibly other languages. She was well educated and sophisticated. Her activities in 1970. She traveled extensively through Europe using at least 8 false identities. She used coded notes to track her movements. She carried disguises including wigs and non-prescription glasses. She systematically removed all identifying marks from her possessions. She stayed at hotels in Norway, Switzerland, France, and possibly other countries. Her travel patterns corresponded with Norwegian military activities. She changed hotel rooms frequently and maintained extreme privacy. Her death. She died on November 29, 1970, in Isdalen Valley near Bergen. She consumed 50-70 sleeping pills shortly before death. She had petrol on her clothing and was deliberately set on fire. She was alive and breathing when the fire started. The fire burned primarily the front of her body. Her belongings were arranged around her in a deliberate pattern. All identifying information had been removed from items at the scene. The investigation. Police initially ruled it probable suicide. Evidence suggesting intelligence involvement was downplayed or ignored. Much of the case evidence later disappeared or was destroyed. The case was quickly closed despite numerous unanswered questions. Norwegian intelligence conducted a parallel classified investigation. The case remained essentially cold for 35 years. What doesn't make sense? Even with all the evidence, certain aspects of the case defy logical explanation. If it was suicide, how did a woman sedated with massive doses of sleeping pills walk to a remote, difficult location? Why arrange belongings so carefully while heavily drugged? Why consume pills that would take time to work, then also use fire? Why not leave a note or any explanation? How did she carry all the items to the remote location? Where did the accelerant container go? None was found at scene. If it was murder, why use such an elaborate method, pills and fire? Why stage it to look like suicide but leave so many inconsistencies? Why not simply dispose of the body in a way that ensured it would never be found? How did killers force her to consume 50, 70 pills? Why go to such trouble to remove her identity if planning to kill her anyway? Some investigators believe the truth lies somewhere between suicide and murder, what might be called assisted suicide or sanctioned elimination. In this scenario, the woman was an intelligence operative who needed to be retired. She may have been compromised, ill, or simply knew she couldn't continue. Her handlers arranged her death in a way that looked like suicide. She cooperated, perhaps even planned it herself, taking the pills willingly. The fire was set by handlers to ensure she couldn't be identified. The elaborate precautions were to protect the intelligence network she'd worked for. The quick burial and missing evidence reflected official desire to close the matter quietly. This theory explains both the suicide elements, pills, remote location, cooperation, and the murder elements, someone else present, controlled burning, staged scene. It would explain why she was seen with 2 men 5 days before death, perhaps final meetings with handlers, arrangements being made. It would explain the zinc coffin and quick burial, ensuring the body remained available if needed but wasn't subjected to further examination. And it would explain why the case was closed so quickly despite obvious inconsistencies, because officials knew exactly what had happened and had no intention of pursuing it further. Part 10. The Modern Search. 2018 to 2024, DNA and Genealogy. With the success of genetic genealogy in solving cold cases like the Golden State Killer, hopes rose that the Isdal woman might finally be identified through DNA. Her DNA profile was uploaded to GEDmatch and other genealogical databases where people voluntarily submit their DNA to find relatives. The hope was that even if the Isdal woman herself wasn't in any database, a distant cousin or relative might be, someone who'd submitted their DNA for ancestry research, not knowing they were related to an unsolved mystery. Genealogists worked to build family trees from any potential matches, hoping to triangulate back to possible candidates for the Isdal woman's identity. As of 2024, this process has generated leads, but no definitive identification. The challenge is that she likely came from a region, Germany/Eastern Europe, where DNA testing for genealogy is less common than in the United States. If she was involved in intelligence work, her family might have been deliberately obscured in records. The time period, born likely 1930 to 1940, means many immediate family members are deceased. Cultural and privacy factors in Europe make people less likely to submit DNA to databases, but the DNA remains in databases waiting. Every day, new people submit their DNA for ancestry testing. Every day, there's a chance of a match. The NRK podcast Death in Ice Valley generated worldwide interest and created an online community of amateur investigators determined to solve the case. Thousands of people have contributed research, tracking down hotel records from 1970, searching archives in multiple countries, interviewing surviving witnesses, analyzing photographs and documents, researching intelligence operations in the period, investigating the François Genoud connection, compiling databases of missing women from the era. This crowdsourced approach has uncovered information that eluded official investigators, including additional hotel stays not in original police records, witnesses who never came forward in 1970, connections between locations she visited and intelligence activities, historical context about the period that sheds new light on evidence. In 2022, Norwegian police officially reopened the case as a homicide investigation, abandoning the 1970 conclusion of probable suicide. The new investigation is using modern forensic techniques not available in 1970, enhanced DNA analysis, digital reconstruction of the coded notepad. Photos exist even though original is lost. Computer modeling of the death scene, analysis of witness statements using modern psychological understanding, international cooperation with intelligence historians. Significantly, some previously classified documents have been declassified and released. While heavily redacted, they confirm that Norwegian intelligence was indeed investigating the case in 1970 and had information they didn't share with local police. The documents reference foreign nationals of interest and matters of national security, but specifics remain classified. With the end of the Cold War and the opening of former Eastern Bloc archives, researchers have been searching East German Stasi files, Soviet KGB records, and other intelligence archives. The hope is that somewhere in these millions of documents is a file on an operative matching the Isdal woman's description, a photograph, a code name, a report on an operation in Norway in 1970. Russia has been particularly uncooperative, maintaining that many KGB records remain classified for national security reasons. East German Stasi archives have been more accessible, but the sheer volume of material, millions of pages, makes searching difficult. and the Stasi used code names, making it hard to connect records to real identities. Some researchers believe answers exist in these archives but may not be found for years or decades, if ever. Epilogue: The woman who never was. Who she might have been. Based on all available evidence, we can construct a probable biography of the Isdal woman, even if we can't name her. She was born around 1930 to 1935 in the Nuremberg, Germany region, possibly to a family displaced by World War II. During her childhood, possibly in the late 1940s or early 1950s, her family relocated, perhaps to East Germany, perhaps to another Eastern European country. She was intelligent, educated, and multilingual. She likely spoke German as a native language, plus French, and possibly Russian or another Eastern European language. Sometime in the 1950s or early 1960s, she was recruited by an intelligence service, most likely Soviet or East German, though possibly another organization. She was trained in tradecraft, how to use false identities, how to avoid surveillance, how to gather information, how to travel covertly. She spent years operating in Western Europe, possibly with breaks and periods of inactivity. By 1970, she was experienced and skilled. The sophistication of her methods shows she wasn't a novice. In 1970, she was tasked with surveillance operations in Norway, likely related to military technology. She traveled through Europe, met with handlers or contacts, gathered information, and transmitted it through channels we can only guess at. Something went wrong. Perhaps she was compromised. Perhaps she decided she wanted out. Perhaps she became a liability to her handlers. Perhaps she was caught by Norwegian counterintelligence and arrangements were made to quietly eliminate her. On November 29, 1970, she died in a remote Norwegian valley, taking her secrets with her. She was buried as no one, mourned by no one officially, and forgotten by history. Except she wasn't forgotten. Someone remembered. Someone left flowers on her grave for decades. Someone knew who she was. The Isdal woman case touches on something deeply unsettling about the Cold War and intelligence operations, the expendability of human beings in service of secrets. This woman, whoever she was, lived a life so compartmentalized that she could die without anyone officially missing her. No family filed reports, no employer raised alarms, no government acknowledged her existence. She was a ghost while alive and remained a ghost after death. The case reminds us that during the Cold War, thousands of people lived shadow lives, operatives, agents, couriers, analysts, whose work demanded they have no real identity, maintain no lasting relationships, leave no trace of their existence. Some of them died in those shadows, and some, like the Isdal woman, remain there still. Why it matters. More than 50 years later, why does this case still captivate people? Perhaps because it represents an ultimate mystery, a human being reduced to evidence and speculation, a life lived so secretly that even death couldn't reveal it. Perhaps because it connects to our fears about identity and anonymity in an increasingly surveilled world. The Isdal woman deliberately erased her identity to Today, we worry about our identities being stolen or exposed against our will. She represents both the power and the vulnerability of anonymity. Perhaps because it reminds us that even in peaceful modern societies, dangerous things happen. Norway in 1970 seemed safe, boring even. But under the surface, people were gathering secrets, conducting operations, and occasionally dying in mysterious circumstances. Or perhaps simply because we want to believe that every mystery can be solved, every question can be answered, every lost person can be found. The Isdal woman challenges that belief. She may never be identified. Her story may never be fully known. And that possibility that some mysteries remain forever unsolved is profoundly disturbing. As of 2025, the Isdal woman remains unidentified. The case is officially open as a homicide investigation. Her DNA is in international databases, awaiting matches. Researchers continue investigating leads and theories. Some evidence remains classified or redacted. The mystery deepens rather than resolves with each new discovery. The grave at Mollendal Cemetery still stands, though the mysterious flower bearer apparently stopped visiting years ago. The stone still reads, "Identified woman, please accept our deepest sympathy." A small community of online investigators continues working on the case, sharing information, chasing leads, hoping for the breakthrough that will finally give this woman her name back. The Death in Ice Valley podcast continues to generate new tips and leads. Every few months, someone comes forward with information. A grandmother who remembered something, a researcher who found a document, a DNA match that might lead somewhere. None have yet provided the answer, but hope persists. Somewhere in the world there may be people who knew her real name, who remember her as a daughter or sister or friend, who have spent 50 years wondering what happened to her. The Cold War wasn't just about nations and missiles and ideologies. It was about individuals, people like the Isdal woman who lived and died in the shadows, their sacrifices unacknowledged, their names forgotten. Death doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes it comes with silence, mystery, and questions that echo through decades. Sleep well, if you can.